Well, surprise. When you heard the news a few days ago, I am sure you did not think you'd be hearing from me again. But with the automation of computers and cell phones, motion picture cameras and cam recorders, almost anything is possible. I do not believe any of you have attended an interment of the deceased where he has continued to dominate the mourners with his stories. What I like about this arrangement is I am not interrupted by any comments or denials. I have not heard of anyone attempting to conduct his or her own funeral, but this could possibly start a new trend. You may notice there is no minister present at this gathering. As most of you know, I have never been a religious man, and I did not think it proper to ask forgiveness at this late date. What bothers me is that I may not be completely dead, and if I were to somehow return, unable to hear the great praises attributed to my character, I would be very disappointed. What a shame it would be to have missed all the wonderful things that are usually piled on the deceased. A lot of you have never met my immediate family, and I would like to give you a little insight as to what kind of people they were. My mother was born in Germany in 1888 and raised as a religious lady. She did her best to guide me down the road of righteousness. So much that for the first 9 years of education, I was the only child that attended Prospect Slope School 6 days a week. 5 days were to educate me so that I could become brilliant, and the 6th day was to attend the same school that doubled as a house of worship. This was to convert me into Christianity. I believe that before she died, she realized both attempts had ended in failure. My father was born in Switzerland in 1880. He was a pioneer in both the USA and Canada. In 1893, he and his father ran for the free land in the Cherokee Strip of Oklahoma. In 1905, just before Alberta became a province, he stepped off the train in Stavely. It was on these barren plains he filed a homestead a half a mile west of Snake Valley in 1907. He and my mother were married the following year. Though he attended church with the family, he believed a person made their own heaven or hell. He was not a faithful member of the congregation every Sunday throughout the year. He never refused to help a man if help was needed. On many occasions during the 30s, I can remember him leaving a quarter of pork or a large portion of beef in the kitchen of a family that was destitute. When thanks and praise were offered for his generosity, he would scoff them off with the following words: "Ah, well, prices are so low, it wasn't worth anything anyway." His word was as good as gold. When my dad shook the hand of another man as the deal was completed, it was more binding than 10 lawyers with briefcases accompanied by a judge. His word was his bond. I have tried to fit somewhere in between both my parents. I feel sure I fell short of my mother's wishes. Most of you know that I had an older brother called Vernon. He was born 15 years before me, so I had little to do with him while I was growing up. It was really only after my father died that I got to know him. He carried the same moral code that my dad did. His word was his bond, and he became a very rich man, though he died quite unhappy. He was falsely prosecuted, harassed, convicted, jailed, and hunted by the bureaucrats of Revenue Canada. Only a few days ago I reread the book that Vern published, 50 Years in the Furnace. If any of you locals can find a copy, I'm sure you will find it an interesting read. Next in line was my sister Ruth. I don't believe there has ever been a more loving, thoughtful, caring person than Ruth. Born in 1917, she survived the deadly flu epidemic that left so many tiny tombstones in our local cemeteries. She passed away in 2005 at the age of 86. I am sure she was placed here to make life a little more pleasant for the less fortunate, the homeless, the sick, and those who had just lost all hope. She was a peacemaker, a negotiator, a comforter, and a very caring lady. Let me recall one example. My mother and I must not have been very much alike. It seems as I look back, we were always on loggerheads. If she had been a young mother in the 1970s, she would have spent most of her time in a women's jail, and I would have been moved to an orphanage. Today, one just can't take a stick or a belt and discipline their child in a department store. That is a no-no. There's an old saying that comes to mind. Spare the rod and spoil the child. Well, if that is true, I should have sat on a solid gold throne, seated by 6 or 7 virgins on either side, as liquor flowed like water. I'll tell you, she did not spare the rod. Now, this may have been because I would not conform, nor was I about to say that I was sorry. I was about 9 years old, and Mother seemed to think she was the headmaster in a torture chamber. The cat-o'-nine-tails she was using was cut from the center of an old car tire, and it left its mark on the flesh of my back every time it struck. After these strappings, the kids at school would call me suburban for about a week, and now it was striking quite regular. I was kicking about as fast as I could kick. She had me in a corner, and I was screaming and hollering and using some pretty bad words. Ruth couldn't stand it any longer, and somehow she got Mother to stop. I left the house blubbering and bawling like a calf and headed for the garage. In a couple of minutes, Ruth came through the door, put both arms around my shoulders, and wiped away the tears until I calmed down. Then she said, "Richard, now you just have to stop getting so angry at Mother. Every time you get mad, you know what happens. You have to learn to control your temper. Mother won't give up, and as soon as you get angry, it will be a repeat of today." "But she makes me so darn mad," I sobbed. "So I broke the window. I didn't do it on purpose, and she knows it. I don't know why she gets so darn cranky. Dad doesn't spank me every time some little thing goes wrong." "No," said Ruth. "Dad is usually out in the field. Besides that, you don't sass him like you do Mother. And he's not going to spank you after Mother already has. Please, Richard, try to hang on to your temper. You'll see that it will work." She gave me a hug and returned to the house and tried some of the same tactics on Mother that she had used on me. Now, don't get me wrong. My mom was certainly not a mean person. She just felt that she had to gain control. And she was probably right. Who knows what I might have become if I had not been subjected to some of her discipline. I just figured it was a little too much. I walked around the yard kicking stones for about 15 minutes. Maybe I should try and not get so angry. Boy, that's pretty hard to do when you know that if you're going to do something you didn't mean to do, there's going to be hell to pay. Oh, well, I thought, it kind of makes sense, so I'll give it a try. This sure isn't working so well. And you know, Ruth was right. I practiced hanging on to my temper, and Mother didn't pick up that hated piece of tire so often. After a year or two, I hardly even got mad. And that lasted until I became obsessed in the lawsuit over my airdrome. Gee, I wish Ruth was here to give me another pep talk. Really, folks, I didn't mean to get into a family history, but what the heck. I wanted to take this opportunity, for it's the last time I'll be talking to you. I want to thank you all for taking the time from your busy schedules to pay your respects to me and my family. I will be followed by few that remember the Great Depression, the centuries-old outhouse, the long dreary nights lighted by the coal oil lamps. There was the endless trek to town in the old-fashioned sleigh on those cold winter days, powered by the horse that had been the only mode of transportation for thousands and thousands of years. We old-timers will be forgotten like the buffalo, the mammoth, the dinosaur, and the reptiles from the Stone Age. Yet the young and their descendants may live lives never imagined by my vanishing generation. I worry about how this world will survive without oil. All I am sure of is that we lived in the greatest century that man has ever lived in, the 20th century. No one knows what the future holds. We have become so accustomed to advancement and invention that right now nothing seems beyond our reach. To all you young folks, I hope this continues to be true. I could ask little more from life than I have had. All I wish is that some of the precious things I've had, I wish I could have kept them longer. To those of you that I have dined and drank with, laughed with, and the odd one that I have loved with, I say again, I could have asked nothing more. I leave this world with the very best wishes for my children, my grandchildren, and to all my close friends and acquaintances. It has been a blast. And so for the last time I say, good luck and goodbye.
But there's nothing I can do about it now. I'm forgiving everything that forgiveness will allow. And there's nothing I can do about it now.